Sup guys, Chrono7 here. I was perusing around YouTube one day, as I tend to do, and I found this video. Resident Evil 1 Remake needs a remake, and it is, in no exaggeration, one of the worst videos about the Resident Evil GameCube remake I have ever watched. At least most of the other bad Resident videos I've seen, I can kinda tell are rage bait, but this one I know for a fact is a legitimate review, because if you go to this guy's channel, the rest of his videos are pretty by the books. Now, this is my first response video I've ever done, and it may end up being my only, but this guy says something in this video that is so fundamentally wrong that I felt the duty, the obligation to respond to it. Now, I will be cutting a thing or two from his video due to timing and pacing reasons. I'll normally say when I do this. In order to prove I'm not taking anything he says out of context, I will be leaving a link to his video in the description below. However, I feel like this needs to be said. Do not go to his comment section and leave a hateful comment. That kind of behavior is completely unacceptable and cannot be tolerated. Now that that's been said, let's start the video.
Resident Evil 1 makes me want to gouge my own eyes out.
Well, that seems a bit extreme.
It's not a bad game per se. I think some elements of it are quite good actually, but playing it today is not a fun experience at all.
I'm going to have to personally disagree on that one. I didn't play Resident Evil Remake up until 2018, which, if it matters, I played on the Wii port. And while there was a bit of a learning curve around the controls, as there would be for any new game, I didn't have any problems getting into it.
I'm going to say a lot of things in this video that will probably piss a lot of people off, but there's no chance that I played through this entire game and I'm not going to talk about it.
You have a controversial opinion and feel like you need to say it. I can respect that. Anyway, he gets into the video, and up until about the 1 minute mark, he talks about the technical flaws of the PC port, specifically, in his case, crashing. Now, personally, when I played, I didn't have any crashing. However, I kind of had the opposite issue, where pressing the exit game button would just cause the game to lock up, and I'd have to go into the task manager to kill it. And even despite the fact that I didn't have that issue, technical issues need to be called out whenever they happen, even if it's specific to one person's computer, as that is still a flaw with the game that can negatively affect the player's experience. We're going to be skipping over this section of the video because he doesn't really say anything that I feel like I need to point out. Again, he just goes into technical issues, which is totally fine. I 100% stand with him on that.
Doors in this game are, to put it simply, the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen in my entire life. Part of me loves them, honestly. They were originally needed in the first PlayStation version of the game to act as loading screens, but then they left them in future releases to ensure not to take away from the experience. They add some great suspense at many points, and of course just have a lot of charm. At the beginning, at least.
And he just refuted his own point. The door animations, while they can get annoying, are needed for loading purposes, or at least they were in the original release. The developers chose to include animations of doors opening as to not harm the atmosphere of the game by including a generic loading screen.
Do you have any idea how many doors are in this game? I do. There's 267 of them.
Oh, get ready, guys. He's about to spend the next 3 minutes ranting about these door loading screens.
3 minutes of playtime!
Every single door has an animation. The elevators, I believe there's 4 of them, also have their own loading screen animation. Every single door and elevator animation is give or take 8 seconds long. That means that every single time you go through a door you have to watch this.
Yes, because the developers didn't want you to feel like you were waiting on the game to load in new assets. Capcom could have probably included an option to skip these scenes with a button like what's on the DS port or the PC port of the PS1 game. However, this is a criticism that takes 30 seconds at most to make, not 3 minutes.
Assuming you go through every door and elevator once, which is not even close to the truth, that means you'll spend about 36 minutes of your playthrough watching these. Let's say you go through every door twice. You probably won't hit every single one twice, but there will likely be many you'll hit upwards of 4 or 5 times throughout your playthrough. That means that number goes up from a cozy 271 with elevators to 542, which is not exact, but it will probably be a bit closer to the actual amount you'll see during your playthrough. Your number may be a bit higher or lower than that, but hey, this is just a fun experiment. Operating under that 542 assumption means you'll spend an hour and 12 minutes of the game watching door and elevator animations.
I mean, yeah. Loading screens can be annoying sometimes. They're a fact of the hobby, especially during the 6th generation of gaming, when the Resident Evil Remake came out.
Now, I'm not going to pretend to understand how the original's performance would have been affected by removing these, because I recognize that the original game and system it ran on were both very old. However, including these in the remake and not giving players the option to turn them off or speed them up or something is actually outrageous.
Those options weren't included with the remake when it came out on the GameCube, because the game still needed the loading screens. They could have been included in the remaster of the remake, but I feel that the option was kept out due to the sake of preserving the original experience. Either that or Capcom was just being lazy, which, knowing Capcom, is entirely possible.
Still, the remake is not super new, but it came out 6 whole years after the original, and a lot of developments were made in that time.
As mentioned before, not enough to keep the loading screens from being necessary.
Sure, it starts charming, but it just gets old so fast. Here, let's head to the safe room and save really quick. 5 door animations and several minutes of running through the hallways later, you are there. You save, you put your ink ribbons back in the item box, and you leave. Oh shit, I forgot my ammo in the item box. 8 seconds. Grab the ammo, turn around, leave. 8 seconds.
Then don't forget your ammo. This game is all about careful planning. I get making mistakes. In fact, I have made very similar mistakes in my time with the Resident Evil series, but I recognize that any time lost due to said mistakes is on me, not the game.
At many points, I actually find it really comical. Maybe I just don't get it, because I wasn't even born then. I don't know what games were like. Doom came out 3 years prior to the original Resident Evil 1, and they seem to get the whole door thing pretty fast.
Here it is, folks. That statement I said was so bad that I had to make this entire video. This is it. I am about to rip this comparison limb from limb like my right hand was a chainsaw. Ready? Here we go. Despite how the game looks, Doom is running in a 2D game engine. That's why there's no vertical aiming. That's why standing next to a platform with a demon on it puts you within melee range of that demon, despite the fact that the platform is way higher than where you're standing. The game has no 3D elements in it. In Doom, the entire level is also being loaded in at any given time. That's why it doesn't need loading screens between doors. There's nothing being loaded. On the other hand, Resident Evil on the PS1 is made in a 3D engine with pre-rendered backgrounds. The game loads the environment in on a room-by-room basis, clearing each room from the system's memory in order to keep the game running smooth. Without the pre-rendered backgrounds and room-by-room loading, the game would not have been able to run on the PS1 at all. Also, if you want to get any kind of idea about how Resident Evil 1 might have ran on the PlayStation without the door loading screens, then take a look at the PS1 port of Doom. 8 levels were cut, Nightmare difficulty was removed, animations had cut frames, you can't save, instead the game used a password system, the game runs at an inconsistent 30 FPS, which orbits in the 20s, and can even dip down to single digits. Again, this is all with a 2D game engine. Resident Evil 1 would have probably run far worse.
It is largely a stylistic choice, okay? I respect it. I respect it a lot. I really do. It takes balls to waste that much of your player's time. But to an unhealthy level, I understand the idea of not compromising on a creative choice because it best serves your vision. However, I'm also allowed to be upset by the sheer amount of my time that was wasted by these goddamn doors.
And with that, the section about doors is over. 3 minutes ranting about the fact that loading screens exist. But we can finally move on from the concept of doors and instead get to the level design section of the video.
One instance, I remember there was a door that I looked at and specifically said out loud, "There is for sure a boss through that door."
Haha! Just kidding! We're still talking about fucking doors!
I geared up, I came back, I tried the door, and what do you know? The knob's broken.
Yeah, the knob is broken. So what?
Okay, fine. I'll bite. When I was looking at the map earlier, I found another way in just because I was looking around. So I made my way around through the full 48 seconds of door opening cutscenes.
Yes, we get it. You hate loading screens.
And what do you know? There was a big ass snake boss in there. He was a pushover, which I was fine with. It wasn't a big deal for me. It was a relatively quick fight, and I truly did not mind. I enjoyed it. I grab everything from inside the room, and I head out the door. Oh, actually, I try to head out the door, but the knob is broken on this side too. The door does not function from either side. Mechanically, this is a wall. This is a wall with two doorknobs that don't fucking do anything.
Yeah, the door is there to trip up players who have already played the PS1 version so that they don't know what to expect, at least gameplay-wise. This is such a non-issue that he is making a mountain out of.
At the very least, they could have said the door is blocked from the other side, or something like that. This would get the same exact message across. You'd go around and still maybe be surprised by a boss. Then you wouldn't have to take the long, stupid way you came in through. You could just leave and go on with your life.
Yeah, you just leave the way you came up. It's not like they trap you down there. This is a 5-minute ordeal while you're playing the game. Max. That's including the boss fight. Again, this is such an inconsequential detail to have to take up 2 minutes of screen time. Yeah, that brings the door total to 5 minutes, by the way. 5 minutes of ranting about doors in a 15-minute video. We're going to skip the rest of the level design section. He doesn't really say anything that is objectionable. He does mention the game's level design is excellent, going slightly in depth for the first 30 seconds of the level design section, and again to wrap this section up. Given the fact that he likes the overall level design, it's even more baffling that he spent 2 minutes ranting about a single door since it didn't factor into the overall opinion.
Perhaps some people will agree with me when I say that the camera and controls in this game are abominable. Like, truly, truly awful. They're so bad. Oh my god.
Yeah, we're going to skip the control section of the video for 2 reasons. One, he is using the quote-unquote modern control scheme that the remasters come with and enables by default. This control scheme works about as well as communism has throughout history. He hits the nail on the head hard enough that there's not really anything for me to add, and there's only so many times I can say, yeah, he's right about this one, before I start sounding like the aliens from Sesame Street. Yep. And number 2, he admitted in the comments that the control issues were most likely fixed by using the classic control setup, which they are. So we're moving on.
One of my biggest problems with the game is the inventory.
Oh boy, here we go.
I didn't even know you had a choice between the two characters. I ended up choosing Chris Redfield. I'm familiar with both him and Jill through some of the other games, but in the end, I chose Chris since I played RE3, which has Jill in it, more recently than any game that featured Chris. Keep this in mind, it will come back in a bit.
Noted.
Right off the bat, it was fine. I got the pistol pretty early on, as intended, but I attempted to save ammo as aggressively as possible by using the knife.
Yeah, I tried to do the same thing on my first playthrough. In fact, I feel like most players did, and it went about as well as you can imagine. The best use for the knife is to get a free hit on downed enemies before they stand back up. Using it on a standing enemy is tantamount to suicide, unless you're one of those knife-only speedrun gods. I've got nothing but respect for those brave souls.
I played for about an hour before I realized that the knife was a worthless piece of garbage. Not only does it do pretty much 0 damage to enemies, but you can't even use it to defend yourself from being grabbed.
The knife does equal or slightly less damage as the handgun, depending on the enemy type. Some smaller enemies take slightly more damage. The knife isn't meant to be used as a frequent weapon, but instead as a last resort. A backup for when you run out of all munitions and need to kill an enemy to progress in the story. That's also why you can't use it to escape grabs. If you used it to escape a grab and left it behind, you wouldn't have that weapon to fall back on if necessary.
It's not even like this is just because it's an old game, and therefore it doesn't have some mechanics from the newer games, because you actually can counter grabs, but you can only do it with a special dagger that are consumables, and you could find at certain points throughout the game.
Yes, because the knife in this game is a weapon. The daggers are consumables. The Resident Evil 2 remake combined the two functions, but made the knives able to be used to escape grabs multiple times in order to balance it. That way you always had a knife on you to fall back on. In Resident Evil 1 remake, the daggers are single use unless you get a critical headshot. And the combat knife is a weapon. Neither system is better or worse than the other, they are simply different.
That makes the survival knife that you start the game with an entirely useless item.
No, it does have a use. Again, getting you out of a tight spot when you don't have any ammo. If it was easy to kill zombies with the knife, the handgun would be borderline useless.
For what feels like a long time after starting the game, you will not be able to get rid of the knife. With absolutely no clue where any safe room is, you'll be stuck with this useless knife until you find an item box to throw it in, since you have no choice to drop items in this game either.
Yeah, I actually kind of agree with this one. It's entirely possible to soft-lock yourself by picking up too many items before getting to the Peridot Arrowhead, which is the key item you need to get to the Sword Key, which is the key you need to get to either of the save rooms, and thus either of the item boxes in the Spencer Mansion. They could have fixed this issue by including an item box in the main hall, since as long as you don't open the front door, that room never has any enemies in it.
There are an obscene amount of puzzles in this game. These puzzles are spread across many different areas and will often involve finding a specific item somewhere in the game for use in a completely detached puzzle elsewhere. The whole game is sort of structured like one big puzzle box, which I would enjoy a lot if so many aspects of it weren't so frustrating. Anyways, because of this structure, you will often have like 5 or more keys that may be used at any given time. One option is to sacrifice inventory slots and just carry a few of these key items around. This means that you'll likely not have room for new items you find when exploring, even if you're only carrying one gun and some ammo, but you will be able to complete puzzles once you actually find them. Your other option is to leave these key items in your item box until you find one of the puzzles you need. This will free up space for your items you can find along the way or another weapon if you choose, but it also means you'll have to backtrack quite a bit to escort the item from the item box to wherever you need it.
Congratulations, you just described the inventory management of all the fixed camera style Resident Evil games. Be more prepared but have less inventory space? Or carry light but have to backtrack more to your item box to get key items. I personally go with the latter, since I tend to hoard items in my item box when I play anyway, but both are valid options. This is an intentional part of the game's balance.
This is how I ended up playing, which was incredibly tedious. You see, the killing blow to this whole ordeal is that the character I chose, Chris, actually is even worse at this than the other.
Kinda. Chris has 6 spaces, Jill has 8. In the remake, however, Chris's personal item, the lighter, is so important that when you're playing as Jill, you're gonna be carrying it like 80% of the time, so it's effectively more so a difference of 1 space, but I'm nitpicking now, moving on.
After being utterly blown away by how poor inventory management seemed to be in this game, I decided to do a little research. As it turns out, Chris is actually worse at, everything.
Incorrect. Like I said, Chris always has the lighter on him, which is an extremely important item. He also dies in 5 hits compared to Jill's 3. There's also pros and cons to the helper characters, Rebecca and Barry, that help the player in different ways.
He has 6 inventory slots compared to Jill's 8, which might not sound like a big difference, but 2 in this game is huge. Chris is slower.
Incorrect. In the remake, Chris is actually faster than Jill.
Has less powerful weapons, but apparently he does have more health.
Chris doesn't get the grenade launcher, but he does get a lot more shotgun ammo to compensate. Also, in the cavern area, there is a flamethrower that only he can use.
This wouldn't be such a grating inclusion if it were communicated to the player whatsoever. There's absolutely no indication that Jill is any different statistically to Chris unless you play both of them or just look it up.
The reason it's not communicated is because Jill and Chris are balanced very similarly in the remake, so it doesn't really matter, unlike in the original game, where Jill and Chris's campaigns were labeled as easy and hard, respectively.
On its own, this wouldn't even be that big of a problem, but on top of all the other shit creates a collection of terrible choices that are all amplified by one another. I've been very negative in this video.
Well, no shit you've been negative. Pretty much what you've done in this video is spend 3 minutes complaining about loading screens, 2 minutes complaining about an inconsequential door, and 4 minutes complaining about the fact that the game expects you to manage your inventory. I'm going to end my video here. He just goes on to say that he likes the cutscenes, settings, sound, and animations before doing his typical "thanks everyone for watching my video" monologue that every YouTuber does. Which now I'm supposed to do. Fuck.